Hey, Tubiteric. I'm just going to I'm putting this. I think this will be an interesting video. I found a bunch of information that the pieces fit together when this info is all put together, and that is how George Washington was a full-on Jesuit coadjutor. I'm gonna try to keep this pretty quick, but the first thing that of importance I'm gonna show you here was that George Washington. Actually, I'll show you a picture here. Interesting. Actually, and you can look this up. George Washington was a Scottish Rite Freemason. And you see here, there's a George Washington Masonic National Memorial. Yeah, like I've heard, like I'm mentioning this because Eric John Phelps, S.J., the Jesuit priest who goes by Eric John Phelps that I've exposed. He Phelps says that George Washington was not a Freemason. But if he's if he's not a Freemason, why is there a George Washington Masonic National Memorial? And I'm just going to show you here. It's a statue of George Washington. Let me show you here. Oh, there it is here. So if George Washington wasn't a Freemason, then how do you rationalize the statue? He's a George Washington Freemason and first president. And the key here is actually, and I'm gonna link these articles in the description. I wrote this article here. Knowing that George Washington was a Scottish Rite Freemason. What you see here, this is sourced in Scotch Rite Masonry Illustrated, the complete ritual of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, profusely illustrated by Jonathan Blanchard, Volume 2, page 457. You see here, this is a quote to the 32nd degree of Freemasonry. The key to the importance of this 32nd degree is its motto. What's the motto? Quote, ad morgium del gloriam. Okay, this is the motto of the Jesuits. Okay, and in this article, I'm going to link this in the description. In this article, you can read how the Jesuits created the Scottish Rite system. I just want to show you more here with that 32nd degree. And as you see here, this is a Scottish Rite source here that I linked. Scottish Rite colesga.com, famous Masons, famous Scottish Rite Freemasons. See right there, George Washington. Okay. And the Scottish Rite Masonry's 32nd degree is the motto of the Jesuits. And this is from a Scottish Rite Canada source here. Um, let me see here. Yeah, so this Scottish Rite source here says, quote, the 31st degree is the judicial branch of the 32nd, or the 31st degree is the judicial branch of the Scottish Rite, and the 32nd degree is the military degree. I'm going to zoom that in. That's a Freemasonic source quoting that. See, but the 32nd degree is the military degree. Why? Because the Jesuits are a military order. Okay. And the 32nd degree's motto is the motto of the Jesuits. Even Manly P. Hall, who became a Scottish Rite Mason in I think 1954. Here it is. I have his book here online, PDF version. Masonic Orders of Fraternity. You see here, Manly Hall says the rites of perfection were established by the Chevalier de Bonneville in the College of the Jesuits in Claremont. Okay. But I'm gonna link this in the description. There's just some more information here that I'm gonna link to George Washington. Let me get a drink. But this was the information here. You see here, George Washington. This was a conversion that George Washington had like on his deathbed. Okay. This was from the Denver Register, February 24th, 1957. You see here the conversion of George Washington. I'm gonna link this in the description. Because the disinformation agents, like Eric John Phelps, for instance, like says that George Washington is like a Protestant, and if you just like examine his actions, like George Washington, for instance, like the Protestant soldiers of in the Continental Army, every year up to 1775 would burn the Pope's image on November 5th to like celebrate the failed papal plot, Jesuit plot that was the gunpowder plot. So even George Washington called this act, quote, childish and stupid, end quote. So on that alone, you just see here they got, you know them by their fruits. Okay, so George Washington saying that burning the Pope's image was childish and stupid. He's probably a tool of the Jesuits. Okay, and you're gonna see that he is here. You see here the conversion of George Washington from the Denver Register. It was a long tradition among both the Maryland Province Jesuit fathers and the Negro slaves of the Washington plantation and those of the surrounding area that the first president died a Catholic. Okay, you see here, these and other facts about George Washington are reported in the Paulist Information magazine by Doran Hurler. Stories that father, and this is the Jesuit here that went to George Washington's deathbed. The story is that Father Leonard Neal, S.J., was called to Mount Vernon from St. Mary's Missions across the Piscataquay River 4 hours before Washington's death. Tradition also holds that shortly after Washington's death, Father Leonard Neal, S.J., sent a heavily sealed packet to Rome. If this be true, it may turn up in the Vatican archives or it may have been lost during the Jesuits' hidden years. Maybe here, so there's a Jesuit who went to George Washington's deathbed right there. Okay. Yeah. You see here, like I just said, Washington forbade the burning in effigy of the pontiff on Pope's Day, which is November 5th. Okay. Several times as president, he's reported to have slipped into a Catholic church or to hear Sunday mass. Okay. As you here's a quote here. This Jesuit professor at Georgetown says that there was a what was it here? There was a book that was found here, an archivist at Georgetown, that he said that there was a let me see here. Yeah, this so like he says here in George Washington's like where he died. He says here the fact that there had been a picture of the Blessed Virgin at the this is the place where George Washington died, and he was converted by Father Leonard Neal S.J. The fact that there had been a picture of the Blessed Virgin is rather unexpected, and to the best of my knowledge, has not been brought out. Okay. Um, and actually, not and you see like the Jesuits were very involved in the slave trade. Like that's why Georgetown University actually John Carroll was a correspondent with Washington, but John Carroll's Georgetown University actually recently came out and apologized for selling like 400 slaves in 1838. I'm just going to hey, what's up, guys? Yeah, actually, yeah, the Washington bathroom. Yeah, I'll pull that up right now. You see, so Washington was convert or there's a Jesuit that came to Washington's deathbed, Leonard Neal. That's the first connection I wanted to show you, and I've already showed the Washington Masonic Monument. There's an actual like George Washington Masonic like building. Like, here's the stat. Here's the Washington doing the Baphomet right here. And guys, if George Washington wasn't a Protestant, like why does the United States like look like Rome? Like why does the Congress building look identical to like the Roman uh like it's the same architecture, you know what I mean? Like why is there an inverted pentagram in the street plan of Washington? Okay, and actually in a good book you can read for that is Rulers of Evil. I have a quote from it in the article I'm going to show you, but a Roman Catholic called Pierre Charles L'Enfant, was given uh, he was chosen as like the architect to draw out the occult street plan in Washington D.C. And L'Enfant was a Roman Catholic Freemason. In Tupper Saucy's book, he says how L'Enfant was commissioned to do this by Jesuit John Carroll, the founder of Georgetown. Okay. So I have to set so this another connection I want to show you here with Washington. Well, this was right here, the life of Charles Carroll, and actually this all ties in because this is important. Actually, I'm going to show you this right here because in Tupper Saucy's book, I covered this in my video exposing the fraudster Eric John Phelps. But there was Lorenzo Ricci did not die in 1775. That is a papal uh, twisted. It was a philosophic death. Like he faked his death, came over to America to involve or to assist in the founding of the United States, and that's why the U.S. flag was identical to the flag of the British East India Tea Company, who the Jesuits were doing business with for hundreds of years. Also, they were doing business with the French East India Tea Company. But I found this was interesting because I think this guy here that so you see here, the following is a letter from Charles Carroll of Carrollton, who was a Jesuit. Okay, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. In this book here, this is you can find this for free. Charles Carroll of Carrollton was the richest man in the USA. Sam Adams even said it in a quote. You can read that in this book. Okay, Charles Carroll of Carrollton owned vast estates. He had thousands of slaves on his estates and plantations. He founded the Baltimore Iron Works Company, and he was a Jesuit. He was educated at the Jesuit St. Omer's College and various other Jesuit colleges in Europe. Charles Carroll was educated by Jesuits for like 17 years. Okay, and he was very intimate with George Washington. You see here the following letters from Charles Carroll of Carrollton to General Washington, who had been in command of the Continental Army. since the 15th of June. And this is where and Manly P. Hall. I'm going to read to you a quote from Manly P. Hall's the book Secret Destiny of America. But in Manly P. Hall's Secret Destiny of America and Tupper Saucy, Rulers of Evil, they show how there was this figure that was in this quote, this letter I'm reading to you is from 1775, the year Ricci died. In 1775, there was a flag committee that was brought together in the U.S. To design the new flag of the colonies, and the members of the flag committee were like Charles Carroll, Benjamin Franklin, the Scottish Rite Mason, and who's president in Philadelphia. Um, George Washington was there as well. I believe John Carroll may have even been there, and the rest of the founders. There was a in Tupper Saucy's book. You'll see the list, but I want to say it was a pretty small committee. I want to say it was only Benjamin Franklin, um, George Washington, the professor, and I think Charles Carroll was there. But you see here, so I think this Mr. Key here is actually the Professor Lorenzo Ricci, and I'm going to show you a quote here to verify that and show you some context. But you see here, this was a letter written to introduce Mr. Key, who I think is Lorenzo Ricci. This gentleman was probably, so you see this author says this gentleman was probably John Rhys Kay, but I think this gentleman here, Mr. Key, is Lorenzo Ricci. This is from Jesuit Charles Carroll to George Washington. This is a letter. Quote, Sir, at the request of the bearer, Mr. Key, who I think is Jesuit Lorenzo Ricci, I have presumed to trouble you with this letter to introduce to your notice and countenance that young gentleman who I flatter myself to endeavor to deserve your good opinion and favor. Should hostilities be suspended and negotiation take place this winter, I hope to have the pleasure of seeing you in this city on your way to Virginia. If a treaty is but once set on foot, I think it must be terminated in lasting happy peace. An event I am persuaded you must earnestly desire, as every good citizen must, in which number you rank foremost, for who so justly deserving of that most glorious of all titles. And guys, this Charles Carroll was like a Jesuit. So, and you understand how Jesuits view their superiors as like the Messiah and God. Like, they'll do anything their superior tells them. So, and just reading this, like Charles Carroll is kind of propping up this Mr. Key guy as someone that he has tons of respect for. So just keep that in mind. But you see, I am persuaded you must earnestly desire, for every good citizen must, in which number you rank foremost, for who so justly deserving of all the most glorious of all titles, as the man singled out by the unanimous voice of his country, for his love and attachment to it and great abilities, and placed in a station of the most exalted and dangerous prominence. If we cannot obtain a peace on safe and just terms, my next wish is that you may extort by force from our enemies what their policy and justice should have granted. Sounds like a Jesuit order there, and that you may long live to enjoy the fame of the best, noblest deed, the defending and securing the liberties of your country. I am, with the greatest esteem, sir, your most humblest, obedient, or your most obedient, humble servant, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. This is the George Washington quote. And you see here, P.S. I desire my most respected compliments to General Lee and Gates. I should have done myself the pleasure of writing to the former by this opportunity, but that I know he has other things to do. Uh, he has other things to do than to read letters of mere compliment. The city affords nothing new. Okay, so I think this Mr. Key here, though, that Charles Carroll is referring to here is Lorenzo Ricci. Okay, and you can find this book here. This is like the life of Charles Carrollton. I got this for free. There's one more quote I wanted to find, page 94. There's a correspondence from Charles Carroll, the Jesuit. I've already mentioned earlier, if you're just watching now, I mentioned earlier in the video, George Washington, a Jesuit named Leonard Neal came to George Washington's deathbed, and there was reportedly the site of like a picture of the Virgin Mary, where George Washington laid to rest. And locals were proclaiming at the time that George Washington was a convert to Catholicism. But you see here, so keep in mind, guys, that Charles Carroll is a Jesuit. Okay, so I'm going to zoom this in. The friendship thus began between Charles Carroll of Carrollton and Washington was cemented later in the trials and labors of the Revolution, and continued unimpaired through all the subsequent years, but their sympathy on all questions of federal politics will be seen to have been complete and cordial. Charles Carroll of Carrollton was associated with George Washington and other gentlemen of Virginia and Maryland about this time in their scheme for improving the navigation of the Potomac River. Washington, D.C., where where it's situated now, Washington D.C. in between Maryland and Virginia, Maryland, or the Virgin Mary. Washington D.C. We got Maryland on the left, Virginia on the right, Virgin Mary. Okay, that's what Washington D.C. was known as Rome on the Potomac. Okay, but you see here, the Potomac Company was formed before Charles Carroll's return to America when he was being educated by Jesuits. When in in May 1762, a meeting was held in Frederick, Maryland. Managers were elected and the two treasurers appointed. At this session of the Virginia Assembly in 1772, a bill was introduced for the opening and extended the navigation of the Potomac from Fort Cumberland to the Tidewater, and George Washington, who was in the assembly, was one of the committee having the matter in charge. John Ballandine, a Virginian merchant, proposed to undertake this work. The company were to subscribe $30,000 to defray expenses, and a paper is extant containing the names of some of the subscribers. Charles Carroll of Carrollton is put down for £1,000 sterling. Okay, but you see here, George Washington and Charles Carroll were engaged in commerce with each other in the 1760s. Yeah, and Benjamin Franklin was complete papist coadjutor. That's why Benjamin Franklin accompanied Charles and John Carroll on their mission to Canada to try to rally French Canadian Roman Catholics on their side during the Revolutionary War. Okay, but keep that in mind about Lorenzo Ricci. Charles Carroll was introducing George Washington to this man who is known as Mr. Key. This is a picture of Ricci here. And again, this was in 1775. Ricci is said to supposed to have died in 1775. The professor, who is described by Robert Campbell, Manly P. Hall, and Tupper Saucy, was said to have been over 70 years old. Brilliant. And Lorenzo Ricci, you guys, as the Jesuits are geniuses. So if you made it to the Black Pope of the Society of Jesus, he was a genius. Okay, Ricci actually was a professor. Um, I want to say here, he taught. You see here, he was formally professed in August 1706. Yeah, in 1751 to 1755, he was the spiritual director of the Roman College. So like he actually worked as a professor. Okay, but here's the quote here from this is Manly P. Hall here, page 108. Okay, um, on the eve of their arrival, December 13th, 1775, the committee men dined with their host and hostess, also General Washington and the professor. And I think the professor is Lorenzo Ricci, and Tupper Saucy also uh, thinks that the professor is Lorenzo Ricci. Um, let me see here. Okay, the professor was introduced to the visitors without his name being given, and his ease, grace, and dignity during the introduction is especially noted. Okay, something Jesuit Lorenzo Ricci would want to do. He'd want to keep his cover. Okay, if he's meeting with outsiders who aren't initiated into the secrets of the Jesuit plan to diabolically create America. But you see, when Benjamin Franklin, the Scottish Rite Mason, and the guys I showed you in the beginning of the video, the motto of the Scottish Rite, the 32nd degree, is Ad Mordrium Al Gloriam, the motto of the Jesuits. When Ben Franklin was presented, he stepped forward and extended his hand, which the professor heartily accepted. And actually, this is important to note. Pius VI, I have to do more research into his death. I think his supposed death was also very suspicious. But in the Global Vatican book written by Tom Francis Rooney, now Francis Rooney is a Knight of Malta and the former U.S. Ambassador to the Vatican under the Bush clan. But Francis Rooney said that in his book, The Global Vatican, that Pius VI, via one of his nuncios, like personally reached out to Benjamin Franklin to request a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, and just with all this other information, like that, it's very possible. Okay, we see when Benjamin Franklin was presented, he stepped forward and extended his hand, which the professor heartily accepted. So here you got Lorenzo Ricci, the professor, possibly meeting with Franklin. As their eyes met, there was an instantaneous, a very apparent, and mutual gratified recognition. Okay, and actually, you know what, and that's why I mentioned this in the video of exposing Eric John Phelps, because Eric John Phelps, see how Lorenzo Ricci is dressed here? You can see pictures of Eric John Phelps dressed just like this. Okay. As their eyes met, that is Benjamin Franklin and the professor, I think Lorenzo Ricci, there was an instantaneous and very apparent mutual gratified recognition. After dinner, Washington and the committee men exchanged a few words in undertone, and then Dr. Franklin arose, saying in substance, quote, as the chairman of this committee, speaking for my associates and with their consent and with the approval of General Washington, who we now know on his deathbed called Jesuit Leonard Neal, I respect in Washington, who is very close with Jesuits, John and Charles Carroll. Charles Carroll has introduced a man to Washington known as the quote the key man. Okay, um, and actually that's significant because like the papacy views itself as like the yielder of like the keys of truth. So like the Jesuit general would view himself that he holds that master key. But continuing, as chairman, this is Benjamin Franklin here. Quote: As chairman of this committee, speaking of my associates and with their consent and with the approval of General Washington, I respectfully invite the professor to meet with the committee as one of its members, as we each one personally and urgently request him to accept the responsibility and to give us the American colonies the benefit of his presence and counsel. End quote. So you got the Jesuit professor here. Benjamin Franklin was asking that the Americas needs Lorenzo Ricci's counsel. After graciously accepting the invitation, the professor made his first recommendation. He pointed out that the committee now consisted of 6 persons, General Washington, the most being honorary members, the host, General Washington, the host of the committee, being the honorary member. 6 was not an auspicious number, and as none of the members could be spared, let the hosts be included, that the number increased to 7. Mystical number 7. The suggestion was unanimously accepted, and the hostess became the secretary of the committee. The committee met the following evening in the professor's room. General Washington opened the proceedings by asking Dr. Franklin for his recommendations. Franklin replied by requesting that the entire committee listens to the words. Listen to this. General Franklin replied by requesting that the entire committee listen to the words of his newfound and abundantly honored friend, the professor, who had definitive suggestions to make. And listen to this. This is the quote I really wanted to show you because to me, I think this quote proves that the professor actually was Lorenzo Ricci. Okay. After a preamble, the professor made the following extraordinary remarks, and this is on page 109 of Manly P. Hall's The Secret Destiny of America. And this, tell me if this doesn't sound like Lorenzo. Actually, I'm going to go to the chat here. If you guys are still watching the video, I actually want to hear your opinion on this. Um, hey, what's up, guys? Hey, Salikov. Rainy, how's it going? Yeah, our entire history almost is a psyop. That's it. That's why they actually like. I read a book, Knight of Malta, James Farley, who was FDR's. Yeah, he was FDR's. What was the position? He was FDR's essentially campaign manager. He was known as FDR's political kingpin who got him elected. James Farley, a Knight of Malta, in his autobiography said that I firmly believe that it is the right of the victors to write history. And this guy was a full-on papist. He met with Pius XII many times, and he became the head of Coca-Cola. Okay, but back here. So I want to hear your guys' opinion on this. So this is a quote that the professor is alleged to have said. Listen to this. I think this is Lorenzo Ricci. Quote: The sun of our political era, like the sun in the heavens, is very low in the horizon, just now approaching the winter solstice, which will be to reach very soon. But as the sun rises from his grave in Capricorn, mounts towards his resurrection in Aries, and passes onwards and upwards to his glorious culmination in Cancer, so will our listen to this. So will our political sun rise and continue to increase in power, in light, and in glory, and the exalted sun of summer will not have gained his full strength of heat and power in the starry lion until our colonial sun will be in its glorious exaltation, demanding a place within the governmental firmaments, alongside of coordinate with, and in no wise subordinate to, any other sun of any other nation upon earth. End quote. Okay, that's what the professor is alleged to have said. And note he's mentioning some astrology here, guys, and the Jesuits do practice astrology. Actually, Father Jesuit Anthony Escobar said that only the priesthood is allowed to practice astrology. He actually, I'm paraphrasing, but Blavatsky quotes him, and that's essentially the nature of what he said. Um, and in Lord Robert Montagu's book on errors concerning politics and religions, the the pontiff, that is the Pope, is referred to as the sun. Okay, the Pope is the illuminating sun that shines his rays on the princes of the earth. Okay, you see that quote there from that is a quote that Lorenzo Ricci would have said. Okay, and that's just look at Lorenzo Ricci, Manly Paul, and Tupper Saucy point this out. But the professor was the actually like the guy that decided to design the American flag, and the American flag is literally identical to the British East India Tea Company. Okay. And this is an interesting thing. This is from Theodore Greisinger's book, The History of the Jesuits. This is more. Um, oh yeah, yeah, astrology. Oh yeah, that the Jesuits are big time esoteric. They're big into astrology and Kabbalah. Um, yeah, and if honestly, from my studies, if you do, the religions are astrotheology and astrology are present in all the world religions, from what I've seen. But I don't want to get too off topic with that. But yeah, you just have to know like the Jesuits do practice astrology. Um, and notice how he said like our political sun will rise in Cancer and set in Capricorn. Like in the esoteric philosophy, the gate of Capricorn is known as like the entrance, the gate of men, and or the gate of Cancer is known as the gateway of men, and the gate of Capricorn is known as the gateway of the gods. So like Lorenzo Ricci fit that into his little um, speech there. Okay. So you see here, so this is back here at when the Jesuits were suppressed here. So thus, in a short way, the Jesuits progressed as much as before, only in a different way. Since whereas formerly they carried out on their calling openly, now they were obliged to work away in secret under disguise. They also maintained among themselves firm connection, quite indeed, according to the instructions given to them by their General Ricci. Okay, so look at this, guys. At the time when the Jesuit order was suppressed by force in France, Ricci secretly forwarded a letter addressed to his superiors, in which among the matters it was stated as follows. So this was an important letter here that Lorenzo Ricci, who I've read some quotes for you from him as the professor, but there's lots of circumstantial evidence that I recommend reading Rulers of Evil. But I do think the professor was Lorenzo Ricci, and this quote I think firmly proves that, or continues my suspicion of that. But you see, this is a quote from Lorenzo Ricci. Okay, quote, speaking to his Jesuits. Okay, forward a letter to his Jesuit superiors. When you are compelled by force to yield and laying aside the clothing which our Holy Father Ignatius required us to be worn, you can still inwardly in your hearts remain steadfastly united to his institution, that is Ignatius Loyola, and await a more prosperous time when you can again adopt it openly. Only take care to draw the bonds uniting you to one another more closely together, and recollect that no human power can release you from your vows. Okay, so that's what that is Jesuit Lorenzo Ricci saying even though like the Jesuits are banned, continue like nothing else happened. Okay, and that's why like he's essentially saying go underground, go inwardly, and that's why Adam Weishaupt at this time when the Jesuits were banned was educated at the Ingolstadt University, actually became a teacher of law or of canon law at Ingolstadt University, a position that was ruled by Jesuits for the last 150 years. That's why you had Weishaupt create the Illuminati right after the Jesuits were suppressed. Okay. Okay, according to the instruction on the part of their general Ricci, did the ex-Jesuits proceed, and the society was thus continued to exist in all the countries which they were formerly established. Only the connection had to be maintained by means of secret correspondence, and when this was impossible, by journeys undertaken by overseers among their retainers, in which some respects caused a degree of stagnation in the efficiency of the order. Okay. What you see here, like Lorenzo Ricci is openly calling his Jesuits to continue your work like nothing has happened. Okay. And there's one more quote I wanted to show you here this is from Theodore Greisinger's book, 625. Lorenzo Ricci had the famous quote. Louis XV of France went to Lorenzo Ricci and like begged him to like change the principles of the Jesuit order. Lorenzo Ricci had the famous quote saying, who I think was the professor, that said like as long as the Jesuit order like exists, like it will not change. Okay, but Louis XV. So Louis XV, in the year 1762, addressed himself to the general of the order, Ricci, at Rome, in order to induce him to effect some improvements in the statutes of the society, at all events, as so far France was concerned. Lorenzo Ricci proudly replied, quote, sunt und sunt at non sint. Okay, that's Latin, but that is to say, quote, the Jesuits must remain as they are or cease to exist. End quote. Okay. That's what Lorenzo Ricci said. Okay. Lorenzo Ricci quote saying the Jesuits must remain as they are or cease to exist. Okay. So I think this video shows some of the correspondence to George Washington. You see, like he's not a Protestant. Okay. He was a Scottish Rite Mason that has the identical motto of the Jesuits. There's a statue of George Washington in his Baphomet pose. There's a statue of George Washington where it says he's a Freemason. Then he says that he's president, so it leads you to believe that his allegiance was to Freemasonry before the presidency. Okay, but his real allegiance was to the Jesuits, and that's why Jesuit Leonard Neal, Father Leonard Neal, S.J., came to his bedside. Okay, but here's and that's what I'm gonna show you a picture, guys. But that's why Washington D.C. like literally, I'm gonna show you the occult layout. Okay, but yeah. So this is the quote here from Tupper Saucy. Okay, so, so this is from his book here, page 227. As we've seen, America's Temple of Jupiter was erected on the land that had been known as Rome. You can find out there, Maryland or Washington D.C. was known as Rome on the Tiber. It had been known as Rome for more than 100 years before it was elected by Jesuit Daniel Carroll's brother of Charles and John Carroll, quote, Federal City Committee from the properties owned by Carroll himself. Subdividing the Federal City or District of Columbia into plats was the task of an artistic Parisian engineer named Pierre Charles L'Enfant. According to Dr. James Walsh in his book, The American Jesuits, L'Enfant got the job through the intercession of his priest, Jesuit John Carroll, who founded Georgetown. L'Enfant was a Freemason. He subdivided the city into a brilliant array of Kabbalistic symbols and numerics. Perhaps his best known device is the pattern that discerned when a straight line is drawn from the White House along Connecticut Avenue to DuPont Circle, then along to Massachusetts Avenue to Mount Vernon Square, then back across K Street to Washington Circle, then up Rhode Island Avenue to Logan Circle, then along Vermont Avenue back up to the White House. What results is a perfect pentagram, the Queen of Heaven's 80-year and 1 day celestial journey. But L'Enfant's pentagram points downward, forming the shape of Baphomet, the Gnostic absorption into wisdom, goat's head icon of the Knights Templar. Actually, in this article, you'll see H.P. Blavatsky in Isis Unveiled exposes how the resurrection of the Knights Templar in France in the early 1800s was nothing but the work of the Jesuits. And George Washington actually, so you see here like the downward pentagram in the street plan forms geometrically like the Baphomet, and look what Washington is doing here in the statue, the Baphomet. Okay. Um, yeah, here's what here. Gnostic historian Manly Hall, who Manly Hall does have some good information. Like for example, and like what it brought up about Lorenzo Ricci being the professor. This goes all the way back to like Sir Francis Bacon's like New Atlantis, creating like a philosophic empire for the elect. Okay, who are the elect? Well, like the Jesuits are the elect. Like they viewed themselves as, like intellectually superior to the rest of society. And that's why Sir Francis Bacon's best friend, Toby Matthew, was a full-on Jesuit. And actually, I learned Manly P. Hall. I learned from him that Francis Bacon was in reality also Jonas Valentin Andre on a pseudonym. And actually, I'll show you a picture of uh, Jonas Valentin Andre, aka Francis Bacon, a title of a book that he wrote in 1619. That on the book is the Jesuit IHS slapped right on the center. Okay. You see, Manly P. Hall says the upside down pentagram is, quote, used extensively in black magic and, quote, always signifies a perverted power. The Baphomet imposed upon the federal city by Pierre Charles L'Enfant puts this mouth of perverted power exactly at the White House. Here's a link to Tupper Saucy's book, and this is what he's talking about here. Is this inverted pentagram in the street of Washington D.C. And you see there's a square and compass right here, the U.S. Capitol building going all the way up to the Lincoln Memorial, linking up here at Jefferson Memorial and the White House. Okay. And this is where I covered in the article the building of the 30 or the building in Washington of the Scottish Rite Masonry is only like 3 miles away from Georgetown University. Okay. Anything else I want to show you in here? See, interesting. Like George Washington was a Scottish Rite Mason. The current U.S. ambassador to China, Terry Branstad's a Scottish Rite Mason and a Knight of Columbus. But yeah, read this. This is good. This is really good information in this article on how the Jesuits co-opted Scottish Rite Freemasonry, and like many Masons actually like wrote out against Scottish Rite Masonry and like exposed it for what it was. But here's the book I wanted to show you on Francis Bacon. I'll link this in the description too, because yeah, this ties into Lorenzo Ricci's like creating an unconquerable political empire. Like I heard you, or like what you heard, the quote I read, how he's talking about how the his sun, like the political sun, will rise into, or the sun will rise into the political firmament. That was one of the quotes he used. Here's a picture of this book, and guys, actually, here's the quote from Manly P. Hall. I'll show you that this Jonas Valentin Andre was Francis Bacon. Okay, this is page 144 of Manly P. Hall's work, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And like, and Manly P. Hall even like reproduces a picture like in this book. I have a physical of it of George Washington's Masonic apron. So like to say George Washington is not a Mason is just like stupid. Okay. Page 144, quote, Johann Valentin Andre is generally reputed to be the author of the Rosicrucian Confessio. It is a much mooted question, however, whether Andre did not permit his name to be used as a pseudonym by Sir Francis Bacon. Apropos of this are the two extremely significant references occurring in the introduction of that remarkable potpourri, The Anatomy of Melancholy. This first volume appeared in 1621 from the pen of Democritus Jr., who was afterwards identified as Robert Burton, who was in turn a suspected intimate of Sir Francis Bacon. Remember Sir Francis Bacon, who actually was involved in editing the King James Bible, and I think he was Shakespeare personally. Francis Bacon's best friend, Toby Matthew, was a Jesuit. Okay, one reference archly suggests that at the time of the publishing The Anatomy of Melancholy in 1621, founder of the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross was still alive. And guys, I covered this in a video. The logo of the Fraternity of the Rosicrucians is identical to the logo of Martin Luther. Okay, food for thought. This statement, concealed from a general recognition by its textual involvement, has escaped the notice of most students of Rosicrucianism. In the same work, there also appears a short footnote of stupendous import. It contains merely the words Job Valentin Andre Lord Verulam. The single line definitely relates Jonas Valentin Andre to Sir Francis Bacon, who was created Lord Verulam. By its punctuation, indicates that they are one and the same individual. Okay, Francis Bacon and and Jonas Valentin Andre are one and the same individual. Okay, keep that in mind. I'm going to show you a book that Jonas Valentin Andre published, and look what he chose to put on the title. And you guys, keep this in mind. And that what I mentioned about Lorenzo Ricci being the professor, this is right. It's the agenda of like Sir Francis Bacon's like New Atlantis. Okay, what is it? Look at this. Is it a coincidence that who Bacon, who we now know is Jonas Valentin Andre, writes the book New Atlantis? That was actually originally written in Spanish, which I find is interesting because the initial founders of the Jesuits were Spanish. But look what's on the cover of this book. Look at that. IHS with the Kabbalistic tree. The Jesuit IHS in the place of where Kater is. Okay, so this is essentially equating the Society of Jesus as like the creator of the universe here. You got Politica, Theologia, Mathematica, Historia, Mechanica, Physica on the pillars of the tree. Actually, on this pillar here, you got Grammatica. You have a tongue being snatched out of the hand of someone. Yeah, that's like I think that's symbolic of the Jesuits kind of trapping people into like a legal fictional realm with the drafting of a legal personhood. Okay, but I think in this video, I think I covered the connections to George Washington. Good, you see, he brought a Jesuit Leonard Neal to his deathbed, very close with Jesuit Charles Carroll. I read to you the quotes there. George Washington was present at the flag committee meeting that had Lorenzo Ricci, the professor, present. Okay. Um, I'm just going to read to you one more quote from that professor, and I'm going to end it off here. Okay. Quote, the sun of our political era, like the sun in the heavens, is very low in the horizon, just now approaching the winter solstice, which will reach but very soon. But as the sun rises from his grave in Capricorn, mounts towards his resurrection in Aries, and passes onward to its glorious culmination in Cancer, so our political sun and continue to rise in its power, in light and in glory, in the exalted sun of summer, will not have gained his full strength of heat and power in the starry lion until our colonial sun, guys. Again, the Pope is referred to as the Sun in Lord Robert Montagu's book concerning errors in politics and errors of religion. You can find that for free on Google Books. Okay, but until uh, our colonial sun will be in its glorious exaltation, demanding a place in the governmental firmaments, alongside of, coordinate with, and no wise subordinate to any other sun of any other nation on earth. End quote. Okay, and I think that is the Mr. Keyman that Charles Carroll wrote to General Washington about in his journals that you can read for free. Um, just type in Charles Carroll book, Google Books. Here's the book, and like I read earlier in the video, Jesuit Charles Carroll met George Washington in like the 60s when Carroll was doing work with the Baltimore Iron Works Company. Here's the book here, The Life of Charles Carroll, with his correspondence and public papers, Kate Manson Rowland. Not a coincidence, guys, that Charles Carroll lived in Philadelphia, where the only Roman Catholic church was. Okay, and that's where Benjamin Franklin, who's a Scottish Rite Mason, was Grand Master also of the Masons in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Yeah, that's where he was located at, where all the Roman Catholics were. Not a coincidence. That's where Benjamin Franklin chose to live. Yeah, because he was a complete tool of the Jesuits. But yeah, I think that's all for this one. I'm gonna check the comments really quick, but I think that's all the information I wanted to lay out in this video. Yeah, yeah, I know. I've seen you. I gotta look into. I haven't researched the Flavian family of Rome. I do know they're very powerful aristocrats, and when you're when you're that powerful, you can do things. You can get away with an incredible amount of disinfo. And you can create like you can create a religion if you have enough power. You can put out so much disinformation and lies into the populace that you can create like a whole, you know, religion for yourself. And I do think, well, like I do think, I don't want to rant too long. I do think there's a lot of truths underlying the religions, like esoteric truths, but the exoteric truths have been completely abused by the clergy to enslave humanity. Yeah, that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love, and nam.